straight after school at like 5:30. So when school finished, I ran home, got my football stuff, my kit, my boots and pads, and my parents my parents had their own business, so their business was the other side of town, so they weren't home. So I had to jump on the bus and get myself down to Hillsborough, and it was like, right, it's the last game of the season against Blackburn Rovers.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of All Wednesday. We've had a wide plethora of different people who've been on the podcast. Today on the show, we've got Jon Newsome. He's best known for a few other clubs, but he is a Sheffield lad. Jon, thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to come on. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So, got to start at the beginning, I suppose. You came through the Wednesday system, YTS, did all that kind of thing. What was that like for you as a Sheffield boy? When you're coming through that system early doors, that must have been sort of dreams come true stuff in those early stages.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Sheffield Wednesday fan from, I think I was 6 year old when my dad first took me to a game with my brother, who was a couple of years older than me. Football mad, always was. Played, like you did back then, every day, every night after school, weekends. Got invited down to he started a centre of excellence by a guy called Clive Baker, who's no longer with us, bless him, but really, really top coach, really renowned around the area. And so yeah, I got invited down there. At 14, signed schoolboy forms, which I was again just absolutely delighted about. And then got offered a YTS apprenticeship scholarship, I suppose they call it now. And so yeah, that was the start of the full time journey, really. And again, like it was a dream come true for me being a Wednesday fan to be invited down and start my career at the club that I supported all my life.
Yeah, it must have been like a lot of all the way through, just like pinch me moments. When you get that schoolboy contract, when you do the YTS, when you sign your first pro contract, all that kind of thing. Do you
Oh,
do you vividly remember all that stuff? Going, "Yeah, I can't believe this this is happening to me."
yeah, I remember it like yesterday. I'm 54 in a couple of days' time, and it's a long, long, long time ago now, really. But yeah, I remember it quite vividly. I remember the knock on the door at 14 years of age, where they came to offer me. They call it blue forms. You had a blue. It was like a blue form that you signed a schoolboy forms. I remember. In fact, when I retired, my parents gave me a scrapbook.
That's
Basically,
amazing.
they gave me like this massive box and there was about 4 or 5 scrapbooks in it. Where over the years they'd put like had paper cuttings, newspaper cuttings, that kind of thing, from going back to like being about 6 or 7 years of age, really. Um,
Mm.
and in there is the letter from Sheffield Wednesday offering me my apprenticeship. So stuff like that, you know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, you look back and I remember running home from school every lunchtime because we knew that these letters were due, and there was another lad called Stephen Kiddie who got an
Right.
apprenticeship who ended up becoming the groundsman at Sheffield Wednesday for a long time. Um, and Steve Kiddie lived nearby school, and I lived a bit further away. And I remember one day he turned up at school and said, "Oh, I've got my letters arrived in the post," and I left for school before post arrived. So I legged it home that day, and my mum was at home, and she said it's there, and sort of like opened it up, and I'd got the offer of an apprenticeship. So yeah,
Yeah.
just all yeah, like I say, all your dreams coming true, really.
It's so different now, isn't it? You talk there about you sort of getting a knock on the door and someone coming to speak to you and that kind of thing. Like, did you have any warning that was coming, or did the knock on the door come and then you opened it and thought, "Oh wow, this is happening"?
Well, I'd been training at the Centre of Excellence from 12, and you could only sign schoolboy forms on your 14th birthday.
Right.
So I was hoping, but there were a few people, but it wasn't my 14th birthday when it happened, it was later. So
Right.
the
Okay.
few lads in my year who had already signed schoolboy forms with Wednesday and United and I was playing for Sheffield Boys, and you could, there were scouts there that we were a little bit aware of, but um, I think they'd been in touch with my parents and said, "Look, we want to come round and see you," but they'd not obviously disclosed it to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I remember the guy, big guy called Charlie Wayne, huge fella he was, and I think in my scrap, I think there's a photo somewhere of me signing these forms at 14. So yeah, yeah, bit of a surreal moment, really.
No, that's amazing. When was the first time you got to sort of step up to the seniors, and train with the first team?
Well, I played my first reserve team game when I was at school, so I was 15, going on
That must
16.
have been that must have been nuts.
That was mental. I remember. I think I was doing maths at school, and I got this message through the teacher, the maths teacher, saying, "You've got to report to Hillsborough uh, straight after school at like 5:30." So when school finished, I ran home, got my football stuff, my kit, my boots and pads, and my parents my parents had their own business, so their business was the other side of town, so they weren't home. So I had to jump on the bus and get myself down to Hillsborough, and it was like, right, it's the last game of the season against Blackburn Rovers. You're playing you're playing in the game. So
Were you
yeah, it was
starting as well?
yeah, I started, yeah. It's like, what? Yeah, I just done double maths, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all a bit surreal, and then back in that day, you came as an apprentice, you had first years and second years, you were in and around the first team players because you did all the jobs. You did the kit, you did the boots, the balls, you cleaned the changing rooms down at the ground, you cleaned the training ground, all the changing rooms up there. So you did everything, and then the squads weren't as big as they were today. So,
Yeah, of course.
and Howard Wilkinson at the time, he used to love doing 11v11s and set pieces. And so, as the apprentices, we were playing against the first team, um, probably two, three, four times a week. You'd be
Mm.
playing, you'd be doing stuff, work against them. And that's how you developed.
Of course,
I mean,
yeah.
I said as a sort of 16, 17, 18-year-old, I spent 2 years chasing David Hirst and Daly and Atkinson and people like that around the training ground. If you weren't good enough, it was soon quite obvious that, or if you got a bit of ability and the club thought you got a bit of a. You stuck by you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit of a sink or swim scenario, really.
Yeah. When I've spoken to sort of academy kids that have stepped up now, going from the 18s, 21s into the first team, one of the things that they've often said is that one of the biggest shocks is just it's not even like necessarily the speed of it, it's the power of it. Like when you're getting balls struck at you as a goalkeeper, and all of a sudden, there's an 18-year-old's right foot swinging it, and now you've got a 28-year-old man, and how hard it is. Is that something that you noticed as well? All of a sudden, everyone's stronger and everyone's quicker, and all those kinds of things. That step up, was that something that you could tell back then as well?
Well, there's a big thing now, isn't there? I mean, obviously, I'm still in the game, and I look after some younger players and agents and stuff that. And the biggest thing for me is that they've got to play men's football. So we've
Mm.
got this scholarship academy where they go into the under 21s, but the step from under 21s to first team is so huge. And back in our day, you didn't have that. You had the under 19s, you had the reserves. Well, when you got into the reserves, you were playing with and you were playing against men.
Yeah, because that was like,
Oh,
for people who were maybe returning from injury and all that kind of
from
stuff, right?
injury, you're out of favour. You
Yeah,
you had 11 start on Saturday, and there might be two subs. So you didn't even get changed. you might travel away with a team. There might be 16 of you travel away. You might
Yeah.
get, 11 got changed, 2 subs, the other 3 sat in the stand. So on Tuesday night, you were playing in the resis, and you had to
Mm.
put a shift in, and so therefore you then played against, um, experienced pros, and that's how you developed. And I think
Yeah.
that's why, and you did notice it. Yeah, it was the step up was massive, really was. And then from the reserves to the first team was, I thought, was even bigger. But the step
Yeah.
up was even bigger again. So, but I think what happened back then was the decision making was done at 19, whereas now it's 20, 21, 22, 23,
Yeah.
and these lads are still not sure whether they're going to have a career or not.
Yeah, that it must be difficult. Obviously, you work in the agency game a little bit. Is that element of it hard, sort of trying to handle those players who are in that age? I mean, you up until recently, obviously, it was under 23s. Now it's the 21s, and you've got a few players who are that little bit too old for the 21s, but still they're around the place. Is managing those expectations an agent quite hard?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because you don't know what the club's telling them is not always gospel, really.
Mm,
Because sometimes the truth of the matter is that on a Monday morning, if you've got or a Tuesday morning, you've got an under 21s game, you've got to have 11 players and 5 subs. And some of these lads, when it was 23s especially, some of these lads might be 22 years of age. And as soon as you
mm.
get to 23, you're no longer wanted because you're actually making the numbers up.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the hard realities of it. You're at a pro club and you've been there 8 years, but as soon as you turn 23, you're out the door.
Hello and welcome back to part two of All Wednesday. We've got Jon Newsome on the show this week. Jon, we'll get straight back into your Wednesday career. Obviously, you left for a little bit and then you came back. What was that sort of part two coming back? Because obviously, when you came through the system and you had that early stage, you were a kid, you were coming through with other people. Whereas when you came back, that was different, wasn't it? You were an established name, and I suppose the pressures were different then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I was delighted to make my debut and play for the club, etc., etc. Got an extension on my contract on a big run, and then just wasn't included, didn't feel part of it. So the reason I left was I wanted to go and play football. Simple as that.
Mm,
So off I went when Leeds went to Norwich, and then when I heard David Pleat was interested in coming in for me, I'd got Tottenham Spurs were in for me as well at the same stage, but Norwich City were trying to get as much money. They needed to sell me and a couple others to balance the
mm.
books really. So
It didn't go
yeah,
down well, I recall, when you left. Like the Norwich City fans weren't happy, were they?
no, no, I think there was a bit of unrest with the chairman at the time, Robert Chase. He promised a lot and it had not worked out.
Mm.
And that was the reason I stayed there really for the second year. But yeah, as soon as you know that, and I felt like there was a bit of unfinished business for me at Sheffield
I'm
Wednesday. Really,
sure, yeah.
like a Wednesday fan, come through the ranks, wanted to come back and show that it was probably a mistake to have let me go.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think sort of like heart ruled head at the time, and I came back and I thought I was coming into a club that, I mean, the club at the time was doing really well, and I was coming into a club that was in transition, which I didn't realise at the time. I think David Pleat was trying to get a number of the older old school players out of the door, um, and replace them with his own players really. And as it's well documented, I don't think it worked.
Yeah. It was an interesting one, that wasn't it? Because in the sort of the mid to late 90s, Wednesday, they fluctuated quite heavily. They were a Premier League team, but I think the 97-98 season, they finished 16th or something like that. And obviously the relegation came a couple of years later. Did it feel when you got there, I know you said you obviously had a feeling when you were coming in that you were going into something that was building. Did did it feel off like straight away, or was that something that crept in sort of as you were
Yeah, it
there a
was
bit
something
longer?
that crept in, something that crept in when I got there. We got, I mean, I joined a football club. I was going to play alongside Des Walker. David
Mm,
Hirst was there, Mark Bright, um, some proper Chris Waddle, some proper footballers. I'm thinking, this is a really good side that
yeah,
and again, as a Sheffield lad, as a Sheffield Wednesday fan, like it's a dream come true again, isn't it? You know what I mean? Coming back and starting in. I signed on the Friday. We played Aston Villa on the Saturday. Then we beat them 2-1, and you hit the ground running, thinking,
yeah.
I'm going to make a real, real, real conscious effort. This is going to be really good now, and it just sort of, like I say, just crept in. I think David Pleat was trying to get. He got rid of Ersty and Brighty and some of the characters and I think there was a bit of a pushback against that from the fans, which I understand. I fully understand. You've got some fantastic footballers there who
I
this
suppose
manager.
you more so than anybody as a fan as well, because I'm sure
Yeah,
even when you were gone, you kept an eye on it, and like you say, Mark Bright, David Hurst, these are they're heroes at Sheffield Wednesday. They're not just tenner penny footballers.
absolutely, absolutely. You know what I mean? They're actually legends of the club.
Yeah, 100%.
John Sheridan, people like that, and all of a sudden they were like going out the door, and now you sort of like scratch your head thinking, "Ooh, have I made the right move here?"
Mm,
And yeah, like I say, it was well documented then that he Pleaty got the sack, and then there was a number of appointments. Danny Wilson came in, and that didn't seem to work. I'd got an injury. I'd dislocated my ankle, which was a tricky one, really. Didn't really get diagnosed right, so that took a lot longer to get back than it should have done, and it just
mm.
become a bit of a catalogue of a bit of a nightmare, really.
Yeah. You mentioned some of those players that you played with. Is there anyone that sticks out from any of your sort of spells at Wednesday? Is there anyone that you played with and just thought, "Wow, this fella's different gravy,"
David Hirst, David Hirst, Chris Waddle. I mean, Wads could just stand you up and turn you inside out. You know what I
without
mean?
even doing a trick, just dropping a
Yeah.
shoulder?
And Ersty, when Ersty came in as a 19-year-old from Barnsley, I think probably a couple of years younger than us. I think I was 17, and it was like, wow. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Pace, power, um, his eye for goal, and he never lost that. I know he obviously had his own injury issues, but yeah, potentially could have been, probably one of the best players I've ever played against,
yeah.
or definitely with.
Yeah, obviously the Hurst thing gets brought up a lot, sort of, especially because the time, it was similar time to Alan Shearer and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of Wednesday fans always say if it wasn't for his injuries, it might have been him sort of in that limelight. And having played, in the same era as both of those, is that something that you agree with? Do you think that the Hurst was on that same kind of level as Shearer, just obviously not, wasn't able to keep fit as much?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm,
Alan Shearer was record goal scorer in the Premier League, and I mean, I played against him from being went on England trials at 18, and there was this guy from Southampton, this centre forward, wasn't very big, but he was good in the air. He was
mm,
scoring goals. It turned out it was Alan Shearer, and what a career that guy had, and a great guy as well. But I'd say Ersty had probably got more pace than him. Ersty was
mm.
electric, really was. In fact, I saw something on Twitter the other day, and I think it was Ersty scoring 4 against Derby, and the goals are just they're obscene. They're
Yeah,
obscene, honestly. You sit and watch them, but he'd do it in training every day, or you'd come out to warm up, and you're in your mid 20s or your mid to late 20s, and you do a couple of laps of the pitch and you're warm, and first he comes out and starts smashing balls into the back of the net from the halfway line. Can't even stretch his thigh off. You know what I mean? And he's
yeah,
like pinging them in, and you're like, the guy was insane. The ability he had,
mm,
absolutely
yeah,
insane. So.
yeah.
So yeah, obviously like Chrissy Waddle were at the end of his career, but again, just to play with him and being around him, such a legend. Um, and then, like I say, they sort of like moved on, and then the Carbonis, your Di Canios came in, who were a different entity
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah, I think Carboni was one of my first heroes as a Wednesday fan because I I I was alive for the latter end of the the Waddle Hurst era, but like I remember being
How
like
does that
7.
make me feel? I was alive.
But I remember when
Oh, what a
Carboni came
dinosaur!
in. Sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah,
to
fine.
stick you on an existential crisis there.
It's fine.
Um, but yeah, I remember when Carboni came in, and I was about 7, and just looking at him, he had his white boots and his his hairband, and I just thought, oh, I've never seen anything like this
You know,
before.
the funny thing about Benny was when he came in, he was this like really naive, um, unspoiled kid from the south of Italy who couldn't
Mm,
speak a word of English, just like really good footballer, and butter won't melt in his mouth. And then
mm,
Paolo arrived, and I think he saw Paolo and thought, "Oh wow," and he sort of like half cloned himself into like a mini Paolo, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And next minute he was covered in tattoos like Paolo was, and he was
yeah,
causing rollicks in the dressing room, and you know what I mean? They were like, "Where's this
yeah.
little kid gone?" Mad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to touch on, I suppose, a sadder part of your career before we do wrap up. You obviously had to retire quite young because of injury. How did you deal with that? Was that because obviously I think now maybe you wouldn't have even had to retire anyway because the medicine has got better, all that kind of stuff. But did you also feel like you maybe didn't get the help that you possibly would have got if you'd been in the same situation in the modern game?
Yeah, I mean, how long have you got? Yeah, well, it was a sticky period that I think the club was in financial issues. I my knee I'd had a couple of operations on it, and they just said, "Look, you're not going to play again." Simple as that. So I'd got a lot of
Was it, like, taken out of your hands then? It wasn't like
yeah,
a
I
I
got bone
might
damage
have
in my knee. I lost the back of my kneecap, and I've lost a big chunk of my
right,
femur. So,
wow,
and
okay.
they've done, and basically the procedures that they'd done then, they now realise don't work. So,
Mm,
so then I'd got an insurance claim that went in, and that was really troublesome with the club. The club didn't play ball with that either.
right,
They were really difficult on that, um, and that went on for probably 2.5 years.
jeez.
So yeah, it got dragged
Insult
through
to injury,
the
isn't it, really?
yeah, and it really left a real bitter taste in my mouth really, with some of the strokes that they pulled. But then and it makes you fall out of love with the game, and you fall out of love with the club as well.
Mm,
But then I suppose time's a great healer, and eventually I looked at it and thought, it's not the club, it's the people that are running the club at the time.
mhm.
Those people have now moved on, and there's different people in the club, and it's still Sheffield Wednesday. It's still the club that I've always supported. It's still the club that I love. So, but it did take a bit of time for me to get my head around that. In all honesty, yeah,
Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it? But like you say, I think the club will always be bigger than the people involved with it.
yeah,
It's the same with any football team, and I think it's one of the things that um, is so great about this sport that we love is that you know that football club will always be there in some hopefully always be there in some way, shape, or form. John, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Maybe we'll have you on again at some point. We've got a fair few episodes to go.